Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for most of you for coming on time, and sorry about the black hole that Low-Perel tends to be. Welcome. I'd like to invite Alessandro Giuliani from the SDA Bocconi School. He is the director of the Asia Center, SDA Bocconi Asia Center. So welcome. Thank you so much for helping us put this event together, and over to you to introduce the evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Rashmi, and good evening to everybody. Thank you again for coming to everybody. We are quite excited. Just 2 words who we are so that you understand why I'm speaking. SDA Bocconi Asia Center is the center, the Pan-Asian hub for SDA Bocconi School of Management. Bocconi is Italy's largest business university and one of the best in the world. We're ranked number 8 in the world, though not many people know about that. So very good. We've been there for 117 years, and we've opened a campus here in Mumbai 7 years back. And we've been running a full-time master, it's called MBA in India, and an executive MBA. And we are now about to launch a program in arts management, which is an offspring of the master in arts management that we run in Italy, which is the best in the world. This is it's going to be a short program of around 1 month, with 1 week each in Mumbai, Delhi, Beijing, and Milan. And the idea today is to understand a little bit more about the gaps, the needs of the Indian market in terms of arts management. So we are very excited with such a bright table here and audience to understand more about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Alessandro. Thank you for joining us, everyone, today. So, my name is Rashmi Dhanwani. I'll be moderating the session this evening. I'll just begin by introducing what we are trying to do when, this evening for you. That's our event, just to give you a context of what we are trying to do here today. So we're doing a study which has been commissioned by SDA Bocconi. The study covers cultural professionals, humanities and art students, those aspiring for a career in the cultural sector in India. We are trying to sort of understand what are the gaps and barriers in accessing upskilling opportunities, arts management training in the country, in some sense directly from the horse's mouth. So while what tends to happen when any new academic program is established, you tend to talk to sector leaders. You tend to talk to institutional heads to figure out what are the gaps in the sector. But here, I don't know how many of us have spoken to people who are in the sector, who are facing the challenges of growth in the sector, of accessing learning opportunities in the sector. So this was our attempt to sort of balance that perspective through a research study that we are doing. So this is just to give you a context of how we are doing the study. We were doing about 10 to 15 in-depth interviews. Focus group discussions, we did one in Delhi, we're doing one in Bombay next week, and public events such as this. So in total it'll cover about 100 plus cultural professionals from varied backgrounds. And we're also looking at doing a survey. So just to give you the overall spectrum of what we are covering. Here are the objectives of the study. We're trying to identify the skilling needs of cultural sector professionals. Also at the same time getting some insights on the barriers faced by those who are accessing or looking to access those upskilling opportunities, either in higher education or not, even if they don't relate to a full-fledged master's or something that you have to pay for, even if it's a fellowship, but what are your barriers that you're facing at the moment? And equally important is what drives you to be in the sector. I mean, we all know the wonderful pay scales in the cultural sector in Asia, but there's a reason why all of us are here. So we're it's for us to also understand why we choose to continue to walk in some sense the road less traveled, and identify these gaps as well. The output, as I mentioned earlier, would be a research-led white paper which will be published next month, accessible to everybody, so it will be in the public domain. And there will be, of course, a set of recommendations for SDA Bocconi on how should they look at the programs that they continue to develop in India or in Asia here on. So here's a quick glimpse of our illustrious table today. I'm not going to introduce in detail because we'll be covering that in the session as well. So I'll start with David Berthollet, who is the Dean at SDA Bocconi Asia Center and Associate Professor of Practice of Strategy and Entrepreneurship at the SDA Bocconi School of Management. We have Deepthi Sasidharan, who's an art historian, curator, and founder director at Eka Archiving, a cultural advisory. We've got Dianne, who has worked as a catalyst at the Godrej India Culture Lab for the last 5 years. We have Divya Bhatia, who is a versatile arts professional with experience across a variety of disciplines. He's based in Bombay as an independent festival programmer, performing arts curator, consultant, and producer. We have Niloufer Sagar, who has worked in arts management in India and internationally for over 2 decades. Her specializations are theatre productions, festival management, and site-responsive work. Preema John, she's an arts manager, cultural producer, and curator based in Mumbai. And she's currently the Associate Director of Asia Society, India Center. We've got Rafael Pereira, who's an intellectual property strategist working at the intersection of law and business, relating to technology, entertainment, arts, and culture. He's also the founder of the Mumbai Assembly. And we have Terrell Shaw, who has been with QTP. She works in the capacity of a creative producer and production manager. And that's all we have from our panel. So just to also give you a sense that we have a group of people coming from very wide backgrounds within the cultural sector. So here is also an opportunity for us to explore some of their journeys and what they've been like. Before we dive into the discussion, a few ground rules. This session is going to be about 90 minutes once we go through our first round, which we'll just come to the introduction and a description of our journeys into the cultural sector. It'll be led by the moderator. And I will be calling that card at various points. It had to do that in Delhi, and I'll be doing that here as well. So we'll be the session is such that for the first 30 to 40 minutes, it'll be restricted to this table, but then we will open it up, and anybody from here can walk in, join us, drag your chairs and join us if there's no space, or just stand and speak. It doesn't matter. But the whole idea is we want this to be a conversation that's not between a panel and an audience, but it's with all of us. So we want that kind of participation and conversation. And what we often tell people, that there are no stupid questions. You know, every question is valid. Every doubt has legitimacy and space here. Just a few ground rules. Request you to take turns while speaking, listen, best not to interrupt when someone's trying to make a point, just so that we can have a respectful discussion. And the last bit is about, and this is where I think it'll be good to have consensus. Do we all agree that we should not be using offensive language? If there are disagreements, can we agree to have those conversations?
We have to be allowed to use offensive.
I will call Arnab.
Take permission of the moderator. Yeah, take your permission.
This is being recorded, so the last point of confidentiality is a bit moot. But having said that, I do want to say that if there is something that you don't want us to put on camera, please do share with us, and we'll be happy to not add that into the final edit. So to begin with, once again, welcome all of you. We'll start by, we had like a massive page of everyone's bios, but we decided not to go in that direction and hear firsthand from the horse's mouth what everybody's journeys have been in the cultural sector. How do they land up, in the position that they are? So what we're going to do now is request each of the speakers here on the table to give us a sense of what their journeys have been like in the cultural sector. So anybody can go first.
Hello everyone. Hi, my name is Preema and I currently work as an arts manager, and I head an organization called the Asia Society India Center, but my journey to reach here has been long and winding. And I didn't always start out with so much conviction about calling myself an arts manager. It's something I arrived at actually much later. My association with the arts started in college, where there was a theatre group, and some of the coolest, nicest, funnest people seemed to be in this theatre group, so I decided to join. And of course, like everyone else, I decided to act first, and that didn't go down too well. It was not my fault. He was just a very bad director. But I I loved working backstage. I loved putting it all together. So I did everything from fundraising to set development, basically managing the whole team. And that's how my relationship started with the arts. But I didn't continue on that path, and I decided to work in development because my pull was more to do with public service. So I worked in the development sector for about a year and a half or so. And then I realized that arts is my passion, but there was no way to define it. So every time I said, okay, that's what I want to do, a lot of people kept telling me, so you want to do event management? And I was like, no, not really. There was really, honestly, no way of defining what I wanted to do. But what I decided to do was start working with organizations and see what I can develop from there, and then potentially look at studying further. I'd taken, I think, 2 years or 3 years off. I worked with the performing arts sector to begin with, and I worked on large-scale festivals. And then I decided to do my master's program, which was at that time very few knew, which was the Arts and Aesthetics program at JNU. And that was by far the most fantastic program that I could have done at that time and that stage in my career. It gave me a theoretical grounding in what I wanted to do, but what was missing and is still missing in that program is a practicing kind of base in terms of what kind of working life you can have, what kind of professions you can enter. So what I did throughout my master's was continue volunteering and working with different organizations. And what I have done throughout my career is look at projects and people that I admire and then approach them and say, hey, I want to work with you. So I did my master's, and then I worked in the performing arts, and a lot of my journey actually has been dictated by opportunities. So I started with working in the public sector and wanting to work with performance, but my next opportunity, because I decided to pack bag and baggage from Delhi and move to Bombay, which has been home for some time now. And here, through a series of events, which perhaps we can discuss later, I ended up working at the Bhavdaji Lad Museum. And when the director at the time called me, she said, you know, I run this museum called Bhavdaji Lad, and she sounded very serious, and I'd met her before. And all I could hear was pav bhaji. So, and I did not want to make her repeat because she sounded very serious, and this is Mrs. Tasneem Zakaria Mehta, if all of you know. And for the life of me, I could not find any information online. I found there was a website reference, there was no website, there was nothing, and I was like, acha, there is a building. Anyway, I met her, I spent 2.5 glorious years with her. I learned so much, tough, easy, contemporary art, suddenly museum management, registrar, collections, this, that, and the other. From there, I moved on to, I got very tired at the end of 2.5 years. It was mentally very exhausting because I was essentially running the museum through, again, a series of other events and incidents that happened. I then went on to work with the Kochi Biennale Foundation. And at that time, this was a project that nobody had heard about. It was the Pav Bhaji equivalent of contemporary art. And when I told people that I'm moving to work with Bose, Krishnamachari and Riaz Komu on the Kochi project, a lot of them laughed and said, are you sure that project is going to take off? For me, a buy-in also was that it was in Kerala, and the project was so ambitious, and my passion has always been working in the public, and I could not access a much bigger public than working on a Biennale. And that too, potentially India's first Biennale was too good an opportunity. So I worked with them for about 6-7 months. Unfortunately, I couldn't work longer because I'd already been accepted for a program abroad. So I left. I did my master's in arts administration at that time. It sounds like it was very easy, but it wasn't. It was a build-up because throughout that time, I was looking at programs that I could do. I did not want to do a 1-year master's. I was very sure I wanted to do a 2-year master's. Also, it is unaffordably expensive, especially if you're working in the arts. You know you're not going to come back to MBA salary, so you don't want to take that loan, you don't want to take that money from your family, etc. So I had to build up to getting a scholarship, etc., etc. I spent 2 years in Chicago, did the arts administration degree, and then came back to work on the 2014 edition of the Biennale, which is where I see the baby. I think I'm reaching to today very soon. I will close. So I worked on the 2014 edition, which was, I learned so much. I could not have possibly learned as much as I did on that project. And in that 1.5-2 years I spent in Kochi and with the people I worked with, it also took me a long time to recover from the project because it's just so exhausting. And the scale of it is something that has not been done in India before, and ambitions are just through the roof. So I did the Biennale, came back, and I did set up an arts consultancy, and I'm happy to talk about that as well. And all of it has not been success and winnings and, oh my God, this was also fantastic. There have been failures, learnings all along the way. The arts consultancy is still active, and my partner is based out of Delhi, and I'm based out of Bombay. And I joined the Asia Society because it was an international organization opportunity from working within my country, and it kind of has expanded my horizons beyond arts and culture to also work on a bit of business and policy, which anyway I have a grounding in by just being, I think all of us have a grounding in. And honestly, arts don't work in a silo. You work with a lot of politics and a lot of other things that are happening. So yeah, that's where I am today. And my master's thesis when I was at Chicago actually was about developing an arts administration paradigm for India. So it's very, very special for me to be part of this conversation today. Thank you.
I'm Niloufer. I fell into the arts entirely by accident. I was one of those people that was sort of lucky enough to grow up backstage. My parents were music promoters, and they used to import, Western classical musicians, dancers, ballet companies to India. And I kind of grew up, at the back of the NCPA, the Homi Bhabha Theatre, which some of the older people in the room may remember. I didn't think I wanted to work in the arts, primarily because we didn't know it was an occupation or a full-time occupation then. Back in the early 90s when I started, everybody had another job. So I fell into it one summer vacation when I was in college. A family friend who was a production manager for a theatre company asked me if I wanted to do backstage. And I said yes. I loved theatre. I loved going and watching stuff. I said yes, and then I never stopped. Simply because, to me, the reason we are all in the arts, or I am in the arts, is because it's an addiction. I don't think there's that much choice. It really is, a sort of magnetic pull. So I started working sort of backstage in theatre. Still didn't think I wanted to make a career in it. I kind of had aspirations towards filmmaking, journalism. But each project that I worked on, each play that I worked on, was just so much fun that I just kept postponing getting a real job. And it was interesting because at that time, sort of in the mid-90s, was when arts management as a profession was kind of coming into its own. So there were people who were kind of working in it full-time, beginning to make sort of, a full-time job. And I was lucky enough to sort of meet people who just offered me lots of work, who guided me through that process. One, of course, who was at this table, Divya. So I worked in theatre production for a long time while I was studying other things, and then sort of went into working with the NCPA, working with organizations like the British Council, working with organizations like the Jindal Arts Center, which was based in the NCPA at the time. When I started, for about the first 4 or 5 years, I had 3 part-time jobs. But I was just lucky enough to have a lot of individuals who kind of, guided me and mentored me through that process. Post that, again, thanks to Divya, I ended up at the Jaipur Festival, which at that time was a 100-event, 10-day festival of all the performing arts, not just literature. We started literature in our second year there, in my second year there, I should say. Worked in Jaipur, came back to Bombay for a few years, worked freelance on various projects, worked in fundraising with the SRTT. And then I kind of felt that I needed a break, and I decided to do a master's program in the UK. And for me, that was really key because kind of up until then, I'd been going from project to project. And what that really gave me was a chance to sort of step back, breathe, and sort of see where I wanted my career to go from there, and think a little more about strategy as opposed to, just the nuts and bolts of arts management. Spent a few years in London working on some extremely pioneering projects, particularly to do with site-specific and site-responsive work across the arts. And then came back to Bombay. Now in Bombay, I work primarily in theatre and dance. I manage a company called the Terrence Lewis Dance Company. We also have a dance school. And I have a small theatre company of my own, where we produce a sort of few small-scale, medium experimental plays. And I teach at a small, I like to call it a boutique school of theatre called the Drama School Bombay. Who's next?
Hi, good evening. My name is Deepthi Sasidharan, and my journey starts with, I'm here as the founder director of Eka Archiving, which is a 10-year-old company. We started this as a private company that deals with servicing museums, cultural organizations across the board. When we started it, it was like the others have shared, we had no idea why we wanted to. I started this with my partner Pramod, who's based in Delhi. And when we started it, we just wanted, there was a crying need for a platform that would help organizations provide services that were needed essentially in the culture and the museum sector. And that's how we began. But my journey started further back. I did my master's in museum science from Delhi, from the National Museum Institute, at which point we were told that your degree is worth nothing and that it's probably not get a job or whatever, but we persisted. I was very lucky. I had parents who let me travel, worked and traveled documenting collections in palaces and institutions across the country, picked up a lot of skills that were not taught in college or in the master's program, but really learnt on the job. One thing led to another. I got a scholarship to work in Goa, where I was working at the Museum of Christian Art, which was at that point transitioning. That led to a scholarship with the Fundação Orient. I had the opportunity to go to Portugal. And it really was a bit of a winding road. Came back, continued working with projects. I had finished my master's and got a job as a lecturer, which according to the family was that I was all set, and went off to the Cochin University, where I was teaching at the Hill Palace. I was teaching museology and museum studies as part of the Cochin University. Very soon I tired, primarily because I realized I didn't know enough, so I wasn't teaching my students anything that I didn't know or that wasn't available in the books. So I went back to working with projects. I went to Hyderabad, where I worked with a fabulous center of mentors, where we converted a whole palace complex into a museum complex. And I think that's when I knew that this is where I wanted to do. The project was the Chaumala Palace. The day we opened, we had 20 visitors. Today, the palace gets up to 20,000 visitors on peak days. So there was some vindication. This led to part of this and some other work that we'd done. Like everyone else, I couldn't afford a fancy degree, though I'd applied in both the UK and America and gotten accepted. I never had a full scholarship, but finally I got the Fulbright, and that led to me going to New York, where I was a Fulbright fellow at the Met. I came back and got a fancy corporate job as the chief archivist at the Tata Central Archives in Pune, which was my foray into corporate archiving. Very honestly, I took the job because it was just the only job that I got in the city of Pune. But it was a fabulous learning exercise, and I got to meet with the heritage side of the corporate India, where I continue to work today. And but again, tired very soon because there was nothing else to do beyond that. That's when I decided to start the company with Pramod. Eka is today 10 years old and the journey has been fabulous. We've had the opportunity to work with some of the best cultural organizations across the country. We've done over 30 projects. We've built ourselves up, starting with simple exhibitions to now being the fulcrum around which cultural projects really swivel. We work with governments. We are currently showcasing 3 exhibitions, one in Bahrain, one in Dubai, one in Delhi. So arts management, we've had to work very hard for it in case it sounds very easy. But today we are a consultancy 15% strong and around double that together with our associates. And I just think we're very privileged. So I'd be very happy to share any or all aspects of that.
Hello everybody. So my journey in the arts world is for sure the shortest in this table. I am in the academic world. I am a business school professor, professor at SDA Bocconi of Strategy and Entrepreneurship, and since a year ago the Dean of the SDA Bocconi Asia Center here in Mumbai. And 5 years ago now, a colleague asked me to collaborate with him designing and teaching in a Master of Arts Management program that SDA Bocconi has in Milan. It's a 1-year program in which I have had in the past 5 years a group of students like you, basically. Like young professionals who are looking at a potential reskilling, at a potential expansion of their careers, or a move from their previous job to an arts management job. So my experience in the arts world comes from that, comes from the educational challenge of designing courses and designing the content and designing the interactions with this group of students who, from the very beginning, I saw it was not the same. And that was what made it also for me especially interesting, the fact that this was a group that was not the typical MBA class. There was not the typical group of students that have a very clear career path ahead of them and that they know they just have to cover a certain number of steps. A group that had very diverse skills, that had no knowledge of business, and that for an educator creates a lot of fascinating challenges. In particular, I'm interested, and I'm also very interested in the discussion we're going to have in general, understanding how traditional management practice can contribute to the arts management world. But I'm also interested, and I've been reflecting some in these past years, in how the arts world can contribute to management practice. I see a lot of concepts and approaches in the arts world that maybe are very fragmented, they're very much personal experiences, but that can be very useful as contributions to how maybe other businesses that are more oriented to profit, that are more traditional, do their job. And so in this tension, or in this double question about the contributions from one world to another, and I come from more the traditional business strategy world, is where I would like to understand and do more research, because I think there's a fascinating challenge ahead of us in contributing and making the arts management world bigger. And bigger, I think, means moving from the personal careers and fascinating journeys that we are seeing here to some part of standardized approaches that can be replicated because they've been successful in certain cases, and they can be taught. So people don't have to start, maybe even though there are here really interesting stories, they don't have to start from the level where many people here in this table started, but just a little bit higher up. So I'm looking forward to this. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Terrell Shaw. I work with an organization called QTP. We are a theatre organization. My journey started much like a lot of people we know in the theatre. You're in college, you're undergrads, you're putting up like an annual production. It's fun, it is intense, it is long hours of hanging out with friends, and you know, a legitimate excuse to not go back home. And yes, that's pretty much how it started. But again, it is a series of opportunities, as someone said, which has brought me here. So the show we did at a college festival, not even a college festival, for our English department as undergrads, was invited to be performed at the NCPA in Bombay, the National Center for Performing Arts. And we got a call from the management there saying there are going to be box office collections and there's going to be a check. So in what name do we need to make the check? And so a company had to be formed to deposit that check. We were still undergrads. We had to still give our final exams in the month of May, and you know, our show was in June. But basically, that's how our theatre company started. We all saw it as our second job. There's going to be a job that's going to pay bills, and then we're going to do this on weekends and after hours. Because, you know, we love it and we are passionate and it's an excuse to hang out with friends. But that pretty much, as we got more and more serious about the hobby, it was quite clear that this is something that we definitely wanted to give a shot to. So when I finished my master's and another friend was taking a year off from, you know, an attempted career in advertising, and another friend had just finished his bachelor's, we all sat down and we said, you know, we don't want to be really old and 30 and wonder what if, you know, we had tried theatre as a career and check out its financial viability. So, you know, let's try and do this for a year, see if, you know, it can pay. And we were all like, okay, I live with my parents, I need to talk with them about this. And I spoke to my father, who is a traditional Gujarati family businessman with an engineering background, whose hopes and dreams that I was going to join the family business ended when I changed from commerce to arts in my 12th standard. And he just turned to me and he said, if you really want to check out the financial viability of a life in theatre, you have to give it 3 years. You may have one very good year, and that's not an indicator of whether this works or not for you. You may have a terrible year and give up and be completely disillusioned, and that's not right either. If you really want to, if you're serious about this, you're going to give it 3 years. And so yes, I owe it to my dad that I had to learn how to manage a life in theatre, and we didn't know it then, but that was my, you know, start of my arts management life. Needless to say, it's been 20 years since that conversation happened. I'm still doing theatre. Among other things, I mean, I don't know how to give these landmarks other than you know, memories of my life in the theatre, because I didn't go from organization to organization. I didn't go from project to project. I didn't go abroad and study anything. I'm very envious of everyone else at this table who did. The grass is greener on the other side, I guess, but I got to be with the same organization. I got to stay in the same field. When we graduated, we looked around and we saw that there was no platform for young people to do theatre. We were struggling ourselves to do it. We were not being taken seriously because we were young. It was being held against us that you're young. And that's how, in the same year we graduated, we started a festival called THESPO, which was for emerging artists under the age of 25. THESPO turned 20 last year. It's now an all-India movement. We have training, we have performances, we have mentorship programs as part of THESPO. It has evolved as the needs have evolved. It now sees a lot more young people who want to do arts management, who know what it means to do arts management. And that has been really, and I mean, that has been an incredible journey. Personally, I went from being, I was in charge of properties on that first production. Props, that was it. I had to bring really heavy furniture in and out in 10-second blackouts. So yeah, that's my 1998. From there, I went on to do stage management. I love being backstage. I love making things happen. I hate being on stage. I hate curtain calls. I hate the concept of an audience, not you guys personally, the concept of it. Like, this is terrifying for me. Being here is terrifying. Speaking at this forum is scary. From there, natural progression, I had an interest in design, so I designed for our festival, I designed for our theatre company. For the first 13 years, we were an arts organization. We couldn't hire graphic designers. It had to all be in-house, so you learned on the job. So as and when QTP or Thespo needed something, you had to learn for yourself. One of the first big proscenium plays we did, I had a friend who came from abroad and gifted me a book on stage management by Thomas A. Kelly. And it was my textbook. I sat and I learned how you make Excel sheets to track props and costume changes and scene changes. We've learned how to do our own set designs, because, I mean, in India, when you go to get a set built, it's by very skilled people, but not necessarily, you know, people conversant with AutoCAD. Like, you have to figure out how you're going to build sets that can be packed and put away into trunks, because theatre here is traveling theatre. You do a show, you put it away for a few months, you do another show. So there is that has been an incredible journey where if we learned something new, then we would be so excited about taking it back to the next play that we were doing and to apply what we've learned. And so it's been a two-way thing. If a production needed something, you taught yourself that, and if you learned something new, you would bring it to the next production, and then you just built on that. A big learning point in my career has been working on a production of Midsummer Night's Dream, which toured internationally for 3 years. And I got to see how professional theatre abroad works. There are systems and there are unions and there are minimum pay structures. And it's incredible. It is very encouraging to know that what I'm doing is a legitimate profession. I don't have to explain to people there what I do or why I do it. People understood. It is amazing to meet people to whom you don't have to explain your choices in life, which is basically, I guess, everyone in this room. So that period, it came at the right time. It was again a brilliant opportunity for us to get exposure to systems, to methodologies, to working practices. It also taught us a lot of things which are right about the way we do things in India, and not all international practices can just be slapped on to what we are doing here, because we also come from a very unique mix of people and cultures. And I'm not just talking about the financial challenges. I think that's the easiest and simplest thing to address. I think the other practices are the more complex, and individual needs are more important to keep in mind. So yes, that was the next point in my journey, which was about 2006 to 2008. And at some point in the last few years, somebody introduced me to the concept of creative producer, and it was a moment of epiphany, because I said, oh, that's what I have been doing. now again, like I discovered another term for it, which was wonderful, because when you've been with a theatre company for that long and you're working with a set of directors and designers over a long period of time, you're able to contribute to it more than just drawing up budgets and sorting out logistics. You're able to also contribute to the creative being, which is the next play or production. And one of the benefits of not getting an education but learning on the job is that I think I probably learned more about other things as well, and not just management or producing. So I see that as being an incredibly fortunate turn of events in my life. I like to think that it's not just about being a jack of all trades, but figuring out, the exposure allowed me to figure out what I enjoyed doing and then continue to do that now. And that brings us here to, my 20th year as an arts manager. It's better now. I didn't know I was an arts manager for a long time, just as I didn't know I was a creative producer for a long time. But there are younger people now whom we are coming across who know that they are arts managers or they want to be, and that's great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dianne. I work at the Godrej India Culture Lab. It's an experimental space that hosts events of all kinds. I've been a manager at the lab I've been with the lab for about 5 years now. Like at the lab or with the previous, I used to work at an NGO before I joined the lab for 3 years. I usually stumble into things, going with one agenda, saying I need to earn because I'm not studying anymore, and I need to be independent, so money needs to come in. So I started working at the NGO. I was a coordinator for a senior citizen NGO that then led me to coordinating the activities there that I realized, even though on a very tiny scale, because I was basically coordinating yoga class and Tai Chi class. But I loved that. I loved that I had to put a timetable together a month in advance. I loved that I had to be the one printing the timetable in a font big enough for the rest of the people to take in. It's important, it's communication. But at the same time, coordinate with the Tai Chi, the yoga class instructor, everybody else, and figure out that it all worked. And I loved putting those little pieces together. 3 years on, I decided that I wanted to move on to something else when a friend told me about the opening at the lab. I joined in not knowing about the lab. When I went for the interview, I hadn't heard of the space. I went in not expecting what they would think of me or whether I fit the bill or any of that sort. And I remember in my first 6 months there, we put together something that I hold as a place marker for me. We did this huge experimental thing in a huge warehouse for one day where we took out all the chemical factory or whatever. It wasn't toxic, don't worry. But we took out all the stuff that was in the factory, and for one day we did this huge art pop-up which had graffiti, it had a stage, it had a demo soap machine, it had a bunch of stuff. And that itch that I felt at the Senior Citizen Center, that you take one thing, you take another thing, and then suddenly you stand at the side and then you see it all string together. And I realized I love that. And that's what I've loved doing at the lab, because at the lab we talk about a range of things, and then after we finish talking and ideating and feel so strongly about it, because curation and everything comes into the lab, not just with the head of the lab, Parmesh, but the entire team kind of focuses, you then get to produce that so that that message is going further. And I love piecing those parts together. Through the lab, I actually did an MBA as well, which I was fortunate enough to do by dint of being a cultural space in a corporate space like Godrej. I had the opportunity of doing something like that. And yeah, it was an interesting exercise, because again, there were 4 women in the room, and then there were 40 other male engineers. It was interesting because every time they would put hypothetical questions about why suddenly your factory is moving. I was the only one on the other side saying, no, but how can they do that? And then everyone else was like, anyway, it was an interesting experience for 2 years. there was a lot that I learned through the strategic principles that you learn, a lot that you can bring back to when you're running things at the lab. I still struggle with calling myself an arts manager. I'm completely with Terrell about hating being on this side. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I stumbled upon it completely by chance. And the only thing that I do hold on to is that with every passing year and with every passing event and everything that you kind of piece together, I realize more and more that I love that bit and the bio that I had to create to send Rashmi, again, terrifying. It ended with saying that I'm a self-processed production junkie, which I am. So yeah, I still struggle with calling myself an arts manager, but I love doing what I do right now. So yeah, that's me.
Hey everyone, I'm Rafael. I've always wanted to be an actor and continue to want to be an actor. A lot of things have not permitted me to do that, one of which is myself. But so I started out in school. It was the 9th grade and there were these annual day plays, and I was the only one who let the teachers paint me to be a clown, to be the mascot for the annual day and things like that. So I just wanted to be on stage. I felt like I belonged there, and that journey kind of got left behind at some point. But another thing that happened to me in the 9th standard, I was in an SSC school called St. Stanislaus in Bandra. There was Celebrate Bandra happening at that time. I think it was the 4th or 5th edition, and I was lucky to be in class with the sons of the founders of Fountainhead, MKTG, and they were working on this festival, and I said I didn't want to miss out. I wanted to be part of this team that puts on this great festival that has a stage, and therefore I found myself convincing these friends to let me assist them do their jobs, of which they pawned off their jobs onto me, which was great because the next year I replaced them, and I would say we took the festival to new heights, and thus began my journey in events. But also at the back of it, what was happening was I went into junior college. I was at DG Ruparel in Dadar, and I continued to want to act, and for some reason I wasn't at St. Xavier's. It was
Grass is green on the other side.
no, it wasn't that. It was just that my year, ever since kindergarten, has always been the year the Department of Education has chosen to experiment with. So that year there were these online admissions, and suddenly they said, okay, you're in this geography, so you go to a closer college, and suddenly, depending on where you lived in Bombay, you had higher or lower percentages. So great experiment. What happened there was I joined the Natya Vibhag in DG Ruparel, which is producing plays in Marathi and Hindi at that point. And I said, okay, let's produce plays in English. And they said, okay, we have an idea. This year we're producing a play, and you can act in it. And later I found out there was a 30-second role which was in English in a Marathi play, where I was playing a compere on a talk show, and I happily took the role. But also what I realized was, I think this holds true for Marathi language theatre, is at that junior college or intercollegiate level, it's much more structured and it's much more competitive than other language theatre, especially. So that year we won everything with that play, from the Indian National Theatre Competition to IPTA, and we also won Savai, which is an all Maharashtra competition. And our greatest achievement was winning Savai because we beat Natak Company in Pune. So I have that one award in my. what that kind of, it was a complete school of theater. I was doing arts, my 12th standard was arts, and I hate having to pick these streams, but it was a complete school of theater. All of that was aside for me because I would get attendance for doing this, constructing sets and lifting them and things like that. There was this one particular table that I was the only one who could lift that because it was that heavy. So again, I used that to my advantage, and I was in every version of that play. So, yes, somewhere down the line, I kind of had to make a choice with what I wanted to do educationally or academically with my life, and I got into St. Xavier's. I was there for all of 2 weeks when I said, okay, I'd like to do law. Quite late in the admission stages. So I was at GLC, didn't like it there. I was at Praveen Gandhi College of Law, and I loved it there because when I asked them if they had a theater group, they said no, but that sounds very interesting. We can help you do it. And I said, wow, how can you help me? They said we have this one classroom that we can give you every day between 3 to 6 p.m., but only between 3 to 6 because 3 is when the day college ends and 6 is when the night college starts. So that kind of enabled me to, say, okay, I now have my own artistic direction and my own, this is now my own classroom for my creativity. And I got along with me a few other to-be lawyers who didn't want to be there. And I convinced them to start a theater group with me. We called it Lauda Liaison, which if you say fast would violate one of those ethical concerns. We did quite well. We were at Olio every year. We were doing English theater. I think we were one of the few groups to perform at NCPA's Zest at that platform. So I think that platform, we performed it the most because we won a lot of those circuit competitions. And I also faced that challenge of having to deposit a check, but we found a smart way to do it. And we got the college involved and another trust and things like that. And what we also had to do, this concerned me at the time because I was in law school, was getting a censor certificate. So we had to navigate getting a censor certificate the week of the show. And technically on paper that's not possible, but we got it done. I can consult you on that post the show. But then also, then I also met other theater professionals outside of the college circuit and real theater professionals. It was through that census certificate, that meeting, and I needed that contact to kind of get someone to help me talk to this officer in Marathi. And really, on the back of it, I was also producing short films, writing scripts. I was trying to do everything I could at that point to kind of act. And but what I found was at every point that I wrote a role for myself in my own script, I had to produce the damn thing. So I said, okay, you know what, I can get someone else to act, but that person probably won't be able to produce this. So we had success at our film was screened at Dimensions Mumbai at Mami. It was a short film of 5 minutes. And also at the back of it was the events that I kept on doing. So on events, I kind of graduated into the artist management team from the production team, which no one, everyone in production wants to get into that team because they do less work and have better benefits, better hotels and cars and flights. and I mean, I worked with a lot of artists. I managed a lot of tours, and freelancing at that point. So everything from the Guns N' Roses when they were touring India to Steven Spielberg when he was down presenting Lincoln to the Indian production partners you all may know as Reliance, and that kind of also led me to this point in my college life where I had to choose again, and this time it wasn't a stream, it was really whether I wanted to do law. And my teachers kind of pushed me and said, okay, you need to make a choice. I chose to continue with law and found a way to harmonize the two. I also at that point started one of our ventures, which is an event staffing venture based out of Mumbai, and then the other two, the Mumbai Assembly is a project space based out of Bandra, which works in the discourse and development of the arts. Nothing regular, where we produce our own creative content, large format festival IPs like Heartwork Tattoo Festival in Delhi, which is the country's largest tattoo festival. And that was, I mean, all through this journey, I was helped by partners. I've not been able to do it alone. So whether it was the theatre group or whether it was Cater, Nothing Regular and the Mumbai Assembly, I've always had partners, and we've lifted the burden together. One of my partners is here today. You can say hi to you. You can say hi to him later. All of this kind of also led me to pursuing my master's in intellectual property law at UC Berkeley. This is the one in California, not that other one on the East Coast. And that led me to specialize in law and business relating to technology, entertainment, arts and culture. And now I represent a lot of artists. My practice relates to creativity without the law. So artists who really do not have the legal infrastructure to protect their work, which is artists like magicians, illusionists, who really can't get patents for their work because they don't want to disclose the technical drawings in their patent specifications, comedians who aren't traditionally registering their work with copyright protection societies or aren't with the copyright registrar, and visual artists who kind of leave their work once it's done, not on a traditional canvas. So that's essentially my journey, and that's where I am today. Thank you.
It's too easy for me to say been there and done that. But I won't, because I haven't been there and done that. I think we're talking about woes and bumps. I think they never stop. You're saying 20 years, you're probably around for 10. I've been there for 30 years. I volunteered for my first Prithvi Festival in 1989. And I was already a musician then, and I was already an actor then. So I come from a very different background. I come as a performer first and foremost. And my training is in performance. It's never been in the management of performance. But yes, so the woes and bumps never stop. Maybe you only get better at negotiating and maneuvering and managing them. And that's where I think the point that you made, which is how do we find a way in which we can share those learnings so other people don't necessarily have to go through the same bumps and grinds that everybody else does. Each one has their own journey. Each one will definitely go through their own challenges, but there are many challenges which are fraught at a, I would say, the common level. And what's unusual about the bumps and grinds that I went through, and maybe some of you all have as well, is that it taught me more about our culture. When I started out, the word that kept coming to mind was that we live in a quasi-feudal environment. We know the meaning of feudal, but living in Mumbai, you kept feeling you were quasi-feudal. It's, it's that book that Tauro was talking about. I know that book. stage management handbook, but you're devouring it, you're learning from it. But the context in which that book was written and the context in which you're operating are two completely different things. But more than that, the people who I was working for were even more quasi-feudal. I mean, they're less quasi, more feudal in the way they operated. And there are many of us who've had that same experience. So whom are we learning from when we started out on this journey? I must say, though, that when I started out, the Prithvi Theatre was already in existence. The Prithvi Festival was already in existence. The NCPA was already in existence. There were many arts institutions in the country that were already in existence, and they were running somehow. So let's be very clear that arts management, whatever that means, existed long before any of us in this room actually got down to doing it. So we're not discovering or arriving at something new. It's just that the bumps and the grinds that one went through, things didn't seem to quite get managed. They happened in spite of the feudal cultures that we inhabited. The other major component of my journey was coming to grips with what we meant by the word amateur. Because everything struck me as being amateur. You know, I assisted Shekhar Kapoor for a film called Time Machine. I was the 6th AD. And the way in which they were running that show, it was amateur. I worked with Anand Patwardhan, you know, it was amateur. It just felt that there was something that was missing, but that was the energy. You know, you're talking about key drivers. I think this thing of talking about ourselves either as addicts or junkies or being consumed in some way by all of this is part of an amateur energy that seems to drive not just people in the city but across the country when it came to the arts. In spite of the fact that our classical training in the traditional arts is humongous. I'm a Visharad in tabla. 16 years, and this was before I ever became an arts manager. So it was this very uneven, odd kind of energy that on the one hand we had these phenomenal artists, phenomenal talent, but a very amateur way in which we understood how we have to do things with it. And there are two reasons for that, which again is the big learning from my journey, is one, that we only thought of training when it came down to career or to a vocation. Otherwise, we didn't think training was important. So, if you were trained as a musician, it didn't amount to anything, which is what I realized after 16 years of being a master's, equivalent to a master's in tabla at the age of 18, I didn't amount to anything. It didn't mean anything. And then when I played with Ravi Shankar when I was 14 on radio, Ravi Shankar was this massive thing which I had no comprehension of. So how does somebody who wants to be in the arts, who meets somebody who's phenomenal in the arts, where's that connection? How do I meet that energy? I mean, Mick Jagger is the patron of the festival that I run, right? How does one meet a Mick Jagger? Is arts management going to do it for me? Because I'm the director of the festival and he's a patron and somehow became a patron. So I began to feel that there were lots of gaps. So one was this feeling that training only mattered if it amounted to something. And the other was that we lacked a lot of self-worth as performers or being in the arts. Our culture, I mean, I think Tauro mentioned that when you were traveling with Midsummer Night's Dream, you went to places where you didn't have to explain yourself. Berlin is the only city I know that as a theater actor, you don't have to explain yourself. You're a god. You know, it's what Bollywood does to people here. Theater does to people in Berlin. So I have very good friends of mine who moved to Berlin because they didn't have to explain to people that they were actors. What am I talking about? I'm talking about in this journey that I went through in all these years, primarily as an artist, but also as somebody who was producing work and managing things. The challenges that we faced growing up in this space are actually of our own making in many ways. We are responsible. We can't hold the city, the culture, the people we work with. It's really what drives us. And I have to say this, that I ran away from training So it's very odd that I'm sitting in this forum over here. But also what's very odd is I was the head of theatre for Celebrate Bandra for the first, I think that's where we met for the first 4 editions. I worked with Niloufer. I think Preema came to me for work in Jaipur, yeah. And then Pav Bhaji took you away from me. Tauro, she's talking about being creative producer. She didn't mention, she's mentioned designing for plays and stuff. She's also designed for a birthday party, which we worked with together. Which was a performing arts event, exactly. So, in each of those experiences, I mean, if I was to list what I do right now, what are my woes and bumps that I flew in from China today and I'm flying out to Lisbon tonight? I mean, there's a few bumps all along the way. But I came across this project, which I was in China. This is part of the learning, the journey that we're talking about, which is funded by this guy called Jack Ma. Jack Ma is the owner of Alibaba. And it's a massive, massive township development about 2 hours outside a town called Hongshu. And this relationship between arts and business has been one of my key drivers to understand what we do. It's funny that the constituency for business and the constituency for the arts are the same. Who you sell a soap to is who's buying that movie or theater ticket, right? So it's the same people. But why, and this was the other challenge in this journey of mine with the woes and bumps, so why was this divide between the arts, so people who worked in the arts, and business? So one of the things that you mentioned was the fact that how can the arts influence business? And this project that I was witness to is a phenomenal project because it really puts the arts center space in this real estate project by giving full value to everything that is handmade, everything that is from silk to wood carvings to bamboo to, you know, opera, singing. It's all there as part of this township. I mean, there's a lot to say because I'm an old guy, but I'm just trying to not repeat some of the things that people are saying. I think the hardest part of this journey is that unless you can find your self-satisfaction in it, unless you can feel fulfilled within yourself, it's not worth it. It's not about the money. So yes, so some people would have benefited from that training. I ran away from training. I left home when I was 16 and a half, got a scholarship to study in the UK, studied in the UK for 2 years, got a scholarship to study in Canada, went off to Canada, studied for 4 years. At that time, talking about 1985, doing an undergraduate degree in business. And ran from there because then I got a fellowship to do a master's, and my big fear was that I was going to become a teacher. And both my parents are teachers, so you can see how influenced we are by our parents. But I ran from academia because I saw something in Nicaragua. I was in Nicaragua at the time when the Sandinistas were in power, and they were fighting the Americans. And there was a church, they had 2 churches. They had the Catholic Church, and they had the Church of the People. And the Church of the People was where liberation theology was born. And what excited me was the fact that everyday people, normal everyday people, enjoyed singing and dancing and what we call the arts. And the strength that it had about bringing, that made people come together and also helped bring people together was very, very powerful. So in my journey with the arts, one of the things I've always tried is to build in a very strong development angle. And that is my interest in arts training or arts admin training or teaching of the arts, is how do you empower people to be able to do the things that really matter, that they really want to do. I think that's the real value for training. I teach at a school of drama in London. I'm visiting faculty at the Central School for Speech and Drama, which is the school where Laurence Olivier and Judi Dench and such like have come out. And I've been running a project there for the last 10 years. And the most exciting part is to get the students, BA and MA students from the UK to come to India and work in projects over here. And the projects are arts-based. They're about theatre, music, dance, and they are with marginalized young people in Dharavi, or runaway kids who live on the station in Jaipur, or, traumatized young women living in a home in Delhi. The hard part about all of this work is that it never ends. There's no, I don't think there's any, what is it called? The pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Because the work in the arts and admin being a very critical part of it, it's really about the journey. It's not about what we come to, because it never ends. It's one of the reasons why for the last 17 years, I've been a freelancer in the arts and not running my own organization. Though I have to say that I did for a while lose faith in the fact that there was anything worthwhile in what I was doing. And I became a vice president of a software company. And for 8 years, I built this software company 4 buildings away from the NCPA. And simultaneously, I was holding the job. And this is the value that the NCPA gave to arts managers. Side by side, I was the honorary theatre programmer. I was the honorary theatre head at the NCPA. And I remember having meetings with theatre groups in my office in Atlanta building, which was 4 buildings away from the NCPA. So even the NCPA, though it was the center of the arts, and you can put this on record, because I've shared this with Mr. Santuk as well, is that what is the value that you're giving the arts when the people who are actually responsible for putting that work out in front of the public are not valued? So I was on a salary honorarium of 5,000 rupees a month, and I was earning 60,000 rupees as the vice president of a software company, and I was using my software company to subsidize the arts. So we built the Prithvi Theatre website, did the Kala website, did the website for Sangeeta Jindal, for Sangeeta Kathiwada, for Melange, and we did all that. Now what does that mean? What are we doing? NCP itself should have been doing it. I mean, it now has the means to do communication for all the arts that we have in the city, but they're not doing it. What am I saying? I'm saying that unless we value the work that we do in the arts, forget the training, forget the money you're earning, if you actually value what you do, and you can find that space for self-fulfillment, then every single bump and woe and challenge of the journey will come to nothing. I'll end by giving one example. The very first time I was running the Jodhpur Riff, which is a roots music festival in Jodhpur, the first year, 10 days before the festival, there was a stampede in the fort, and 280 people died. And it was the first time I was running this festival. You know, we'd sold tickets. Mick Jagger, who's our international patron, was already in Jaipur. And, I had 2 groups who were already rehearsing collaborative work, one in Jaipur, one in Jodhpur. And the night before the incident, it was the first day of Navratra. Do you know the Navratras? Yeah? First day of Navratra, there's a big temple in the fort, and people had lined up. There were like something like about 40, 50,000 people who were waiting to come in. And just the night before, 10 days before the festival, I put up 12 hoardings in the city of Jodhpur announcing the festival. So midnight of the day before was when it happened. This, I remember, was the 1st of October. So the 30th of September was when the hoardings went up. On the 1st, I was in the fort, and at 4 o'clock, I get a call saying, there's been an incident, don't leave. Don't step out of your room. At 5:30, I was told, it's been a serious incident, people have died. The next thing I did was call the man who put up the hoardings, and I said, pull down every single hoarding. And he was most upset, because his guys had just finished putting it up at midnight, and at 5:36 in the morning, I'm telling him to take it all down. And he said, why? So I said, because there's an incident in the fort, and with the energy of what's happened, we can't have something in the city that's celebrating a festival. he understood, he took down all the hoardings. We had to cancel that year's festival. That was the first festival I was doing. So we opened the festival in 2007, where I was just the programmer. 2008, I was delivering the entire festival. I had to cancel the entire festival. Now, no arts management course is going to teach us how to deal with that situation. No MBA course with any amount of risk assessment or planning is going to tell you what to do in that moment. I had the Maharaj of Jodhpur, who was my patron, telling me, no, let's do it as a Shraddhanjali festival. We can't cancel because we'd already committed. We'd spent about 30 lakhs and we'd another 20 committed. And the Taj was our sponsor that time. So who do we tell? Mick Jagger was already in the country, right? So he said, we have to do it. I said, no, you can't, because Jodhpur is such a small town that if we don't show some amount of sensitivity and some amount of respect for what has happened, we'll never be able to live it down. Now that arts admin program cannot teach you. That is you. And that, I think, is something that we carry with us in the art space. Sometimes we don't see it in the corporate world, right? And that's the reason why I think there's this gap between the arts world and the corporate world. But if you to read today's news, talking about the Kochi Biennale, I don't know if people have caught on to that yet. Some people have?
Yeah, we'll bring it up at some
Later
point,
on,
I'm sure,
yeah.
when we talk
So
about barriers.
people are people, whether in the corporate world, whether in the arts world, ultimately it's about people. And I think we like to believe that somehow the artists are better positioned or better placed to express what this particular energy means. So I'll end by saying that yes, we did the festival again from scratch in 2009. The city has been extremely supportive. That festival we lost a lot of money, but we recovered that 4 years later. We are now in our 12th year, and we sit as one of India's topmost music festivals. If there is anything I take away from my life and my journey, is that the arts allow us to recognize what living is about. They show us in various ways, whether it's a visual artist or a dancer or an actor, of what it really means to be human. And as arts management professionals or as arts managers, I think our commitment should lie there. It should be the relationship between the artist and his or her expression, and to whom. It's the relationship between the artist and the audience that I think is at the center of any arts management related activity.
Thank you. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. I think this was an important part because we all are not sure how we got here, and that's one of the questions that we asked in our research as well. I'll just get to that in a second, but basically what I take away from this session is nobody's parents said mera beta ya beti arts manager banegi, right? We've all had unconventional paths into the career. This is some of the insights that came through. So we've done about 8 interviews so far, and we did the focus group discussion in Delhi. These are some of the interviews that, the insights that we've got. Like, few professionals have a traditional path to working in the cultural sector, unlike a doctor or an MBA. As you heard, the transition and the movement has been either in college through some exposure to cultural activity, or you've got some background in your family that has allowed you to understand that that could be a potential path, and the rest has been you and your relationship with the notion of being in the sector, what it means to engage with the arts as an addiction in some sense. Growth in the sector has been organic. It's been on the job learning and training. There is no sense of, hey, this is what the paradigms are and this is what exists. So this was again a sense of how people's journeys have been, and in spite of whatever little sense of understanding whatever exists, there were still paths that need to be carved through that. And of course in our study, one other question that kept coming up was, what next and how do I get there? And this is where what Tauro was also talking about, people who are entering the sector right now, they need to sort of think of this as a vocation and as a career, and to think of this as a platform. So with that, we'd like to move a little bit into gaps, needs and barriers. And before I throw it open to the speaker panel again, I'd also like to throw it open to all of you. We had thought we'll push it a little later, but we have spent quite a bit of time on these very interesting journeys, and we'd like to bring you in as well. So if you'd like to speak, please join us on the table. There are no mics that are going to be passed around. But the question here right now that we are trying to ask of us, of all of us, is in your career in the sector, what are the gaps and the needs that you've identified which have been, for you, a gap and a need in your career growth in the sector? If you have been in a position that where you've identified the need or gap, please share. Or if you've been in leadership positions that you have worked with your team members where you've seen those gaps and needs, what have you found? What have you mentored them on? So yeah, the floor is open.
My name is Sumana Ramanan. I've actually been I'm a journalist, and my interests are history, political economy and culture. And I have been writing exclusively on music for the last 6 months, but I have always been writing about culture along my various other duties. I just had three kind of theme kind of questions. See, you all have spoken about theatre and a little bit, mostly about theatre as in the arts, okay? And my specific interests are Indian classical music and dance. And the reason partly because my training has been in these two, also because I feel that these are two indigenous art forms in which India has developed a continuous culture of excellence for centuries. It's homegrown excellence for centuries, and it has its own pedagogy, it has its own modes of performance and everything. It is very homegrown and indigenous. For instance, neither of these forms can be taught in a school. For various reasons, you need what is the oral tradition, and none of the departments of dance and music in all over the country has produced a performer. The only people who have produced performers are gurus who teach on their own, literally. They teach on their own with no institutional backing, and they produce dancers and musicians. Okay, so for example, the Bharatnatyam dancer Malavika Sarukai, Alarmel Valli, Rama Vaidyanathan, okay, these are Bharatnatyam dancers, and Priyadarshini Govind, all learnt one-on-one. Because it is too subtle, it is very complex. Our dance and music forms, classical music forms, are enormously complex in terms of their forms and structure. You cannot notate, you cannot teach in a classroom. It has to be picked up.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt, because just to also clarify once again, there are spaces for artistic training. We're trying to focus here as much as possible on arts management training, and I think we're very clear about that, because this is the space that we want to hold.
But that's what I'm saying, the gaps are this, that these are performing arts which cannot be commodified, because once you perform, you cannot repeat, like a painting. I don't think theatre can be commodified either. Right, so how do you manage an art form that cannot be commodified? And I am actually doing a lot of research on the side for a book on what is happening on the fringe. The best art is happening on the fringe of all these, in smaller communities which none of you have access to, because of the way patronage has gone, because of the way we've moved from feudalism to capitalism. So and audience building. So when you're looking about art, are you all thinking about what is art and what is entertainment?
No, please. Yeah. I'd also, there's a perfect example to bring in Kochi Museum's Biennale here as well. So yeah.
I mean, you can do that. I think in what's happening in the arts in India, I think you're making a very valid point, but I think it's also important to remember that the ways in which this management is not some homogeneous mechanism. What management does do, it gives you the tools. It gives people the tools to do things. So if somebody who wants to set up a festival, which let's take for example Alia doing something called Haroof, or Devina working with First Edition Arts, FEA. For Alia to be able to get in an audience, or for Devina to get in an audience, she has to do some communication activity. She has to get the word out there. So what the tools she could gain from some kind of focused learning around that would be how best to be able to communicate that. I don't think Devina can tell anybody how to teach music to somebody. That's a whole different discipline.
But the problem with Indian classical music is that the forms of patronage have changed.
Sure.
Corporate sponsors do not understand the art form. This art form was patronized by feudal nobility and maharajas who really understood.
So are you talking about funding?
Yes, so there is no
So funding, again,
classical art form.
true.
It is only for the diluted work, because this art form cannot be, you cannot
Correct.
have 50,000 people listening.
Sure. So I would say for example, I got contacted by people overseas who say they want to support the education of girl children. Which institution can they go to? And what they want from that institution is some reporting, some coming back which tells them that, you know, this is where your money has gone, this is where, who's benefiting. So to have institutions that can do that, you know, which corporate really has a focus. Now with CSR things are changing somewhat, but the willingness for people like you and me to be able to evolve and develop some systems, some ways in which even the corporate feels that if I'm going to put money down, I benefit from it in some way. I'm doing something, forget benefit, I'm doing something worthwhile. Most people in the arts are not able to communicate the value of what they are doing. That's what I said earlier. And I think one of the key things of arts management training is giving you tools to be able to help communicate. No, that's a whole different, I would say that's a...
But I'm telling you, Indian classical music and dance is in a very precarious state.
Yeah, but that's not, I think that's not the focus of...
we can take that conversation, and there will be, there's also a ton of pizzas and
Also, can I
sandwiches
just quickly
after.
respond to the school question for performing arts? They've existed for years and years, and there are so many that have done phenomenal work, whether it's in Delhi or Pune. I mean, Maharashtra is a hub of performing arts. The Gandharva Mahavidyalaya, which is so successfully run in Delhi and in Pune, Kalakshetra out of Chennai. So there are many, and it's a guru, Shishya.
Has not produced a single performing musician.
They have.
Like, who, give me a name.
In the younger generation, there's... Yeah, I am trying to give you a name.
Because out of maybe 100,
So in the perform...
you have to have a one-on-one guru shishya parampara, because
That is artistic training. What we are right now talking about is, I hear what you're saying, Sumana.
The problem is with arts management is that the corporate, because the feudal, they really understood the music. The corporate sponsor, the problem is this with arts management in the science. And I feel that indigenous music, classical music and dance are our heritage, unlike theatre, film, which is a lot more universal.
There is a case for...
Arts management has not cracked this problem.
There is a case to be made in what you are saying for nostalgia for the golden era, which is I'd like to finish what I'm saying. Sorry, just 1 second. Which is a space for conversation on its own. What I'm going to take away from what you are saying and what Divya was also trying to say is that funding is a weird beast in this country. What the patronage model that we're talking about, that you are talking about primarily, also existed in a context of a pre-colonial India, which wasn't really the India that we understand today as an amalgamation of 28 to 30 states, right? So the context was very different at the time. Currently, as we operate in a model which is an arm's length funding model, with some amount of government funding coming in, and a completely private funded model where you've got corporate sponsorship. So we're operating in very unique circumstances, which is not like the way it functions in Europe with quasi-government funding model, which is not what happens in the US, where the funding model is supported by corporate patronage and legacy. Even in China and East Asia, Southeast Asia, where you have huge amounts of corporate funding, arts for art's sake funding with the corporates, That's our unique reality that we're operating in. And that's actually one of the gaps that has been identified even in when you all filled up the RSVP sheets. How do we look at fundraising in this country? So I'm going to take that away from this. No, and let's discuss this, because I think we can keep going back and forth, but I'd like us to bring in more. So
What I'm trying to say is that now middlemen have appeared of organizers what has happened is instead of...
No, sorry, fundraising in this country also doesn't exist. There is only one arts organization called India Foundation for Arts that does independent funding. I can point out maybe 3 professional fundraisers in this country, right? So let's take the fact that that's a gap. We have not realized how to raise enough money for the arts. To take your point forward again, when you said,
one other point to add to what you're saying, what she's also talking about, which I find a challenge with my work, is how do you manage oral tradition?
Yeah.
Right? Does management of oral tradition now mean that you have now to find a digital way in which you manage it? Does it mean you end the whole oral which comes from somebody's mouth and you put it into a machine? I don't know. But there are challenges there, but like you pointed out, like we are saying, I don't think this is the forum. Maybe we can suggest it or we can raise it, but that's much too micromanagement tool. I think a broad-based arts management course can't really get into that. An individual student may want to choose that as a project. I mean, IFA itself has major challenges trying to document so much. Archiving, you'll know, it's so challenging. You know, there are so many aspects, but yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No, but just to pick up from one point that you had said earlier, that there is, in some sense, you said the constituency for arts and soap is the same, yes. Right? Like, which is someone who's buying a piece of soap and someone who's going for a movie theater is the same person. The difference is, what are they going to pay for buying a soap, and will they be willing to pay the same amount?
Can I just say,
and that's the challenge also that art managers have to look at.
There's a colleague of mine here, Suruchi, she knows this. And this was a point that David made earlier. It's not so much what business can bring to the arts, it's also about what arts can bring to business. And I think that's where I was coming from. We use a lot of words like publicity, we use sponsorship, we use the words branding, collateral, but we don't in this country think public image. We put public image as the responsibility for a PR agency. We don't think it's the arts manager's job to be thinking of public image. But corporates are really, really concerned with public image. Individuals, I earn a major chunk of my income by teaching performance to partners in private equity firms. Why? Because they are concerned about image. Not just image as in what do I look like and feel like, but there are processes in the arts. I mean, how does an actor day after day after day put up the show time and time again, puts his family aside, puts everything aside to be able to concentrate? Sports people do that. Yeah. There's an amount of stamina, mental stamina and concentration that a performer brings to the table, which anybody in the world can benefit from if they understood what that means, how to do that. Now that's something that the arts can bring to a business. So it's not simply about what somebody is going to pay for something. I know people who will not want to pay 50 rupees for a live performance of a folk artist, but they're willing to pay 300 rupees to sit in a luxurious cinema hall to watch recorded stuff which they can watch on their phone, etc., all of it. So I think the pay part of it for me is because I work across, I act in film, I act on TV, I produce. I think wages is an issue rather than what audience member is willing to pay. It's how we pay people in the arts is the larger question. I have seen an audience, we used to charge 800 rupees for a main stage performance 10 years ago. Today we charge 5,000 rupees for the entire day. People are paying.
Yeah.
I think people have the means, people want, they have money to pay. Again, I think from an arts management view, how are we communicating to them? What are we doing to build the audience? What are the tools that we are using to access? People, say that having stuff online will solve all social media. It's a big, big buzzword. I don't think it actually translates into cash at the way it's being done in this country right now.
I think that these.
Yeah, just to add to that and working backwards, so when you do an arts management program, many in the audience already ask, if I do a course, where do I get a job and how much will I be paid for it? This is a constant question that is uppermost, at least in the minds of the youngsters who are investing in a degree, either here in India or elsewhere. So I just wanted to work it backwards, that there are now spaces opening up again, taking from what you said about image building and of how corporates perceive or their perception in the market. So just to give real-time examples, it is the money from corporate houses that is funding a slew of cultural institutions as well as initiatives, from the KNMA in Delhi, which is again a corporate-backed funded initiative, the Piramal Museum here. There are very many corporate institutions that have realized the power of the power of soft power, if I can put it that way, and the fact that if you invest in the arts, you not only better the life of the community or the city that you're living in, but you also incredibly enrich the lives of your employees, of your corporate beneficiaries, and you bring down significantly, and this is of course all studied and not conjecture, is that attrition rates go down. The Tata Central Archives has been around for more than 25 years. Almost every senior executive who's hired is sent to Pune, where they are given an idea about the almost 150-year-old background. Godrej does it, Cipla does it. Any corporate house that has invested in preserving its history has decided to take an element of either the arts or heritage to their own workforce, has incredibly benefited. I think in the years to come, and we are only at the starting of it, the studies that quantify this, much like where we are today, where formal studies are taken that quantify how it has benefited, will perhaps swing the case further in the to arts management and for the case of arts management. And these positions in the corporate, albeit a very tiny umbrella, are very well paying in terms of
and not
job.
just well paying, but comes with benefits, which is a big
with benefits,
big,
like
what
full
what should
corporate
be
benefits,
expected, which is medical and leave.
And you're looking at a lifetime of employment without sort of all of us sort of, I mean, there are benefits both for and against of coming out and again.
So there's someone who's joined, just before we go in, I'm just going to put these as prompt questions for us to think about. Yes.
Yes. Going back to the discussion we were having about gaps and also what you were saying, I think one of the things that business training and traditional management can bring to the arts world is to offer also alternative models in which to structure revenues and to make the business sustainable. For example, I have this example in mind, this little startup in Italy that's been quite successful in the past years, since it started just shortly ago. It's essentially a platform that connects classical music quartets with heritage houses. Now, what do classical music quartets, young quartets that need spaces to rehearse, to train, but don't have any possibility to get a corporate sponsor because they are just too small and young to get big performances or a sustained revenue stream. On the other hand, you have heritage houses that want to cover the maintenance cost and want to essentially find some value for that property that has historical value, etc. This platform is an online platform that essentially matches the quartets with the houses. The houses host the quartets for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, so they have their space to practice, etc. And as a benefit for the house, there is a performance that the house can use to communicate to the region, to the locality, etc. Now, there's no corporate sponsor involved in this, although potentially you could add this. Now, this business is no different than Airbnb. Right? It's that model transferred to the arts world in a smart way, modest, but smart way. So I think there is a lot to gain from these insights and these models that we are used to seeing. An arts training program is the space in which the academics have to find these examples and the students have time to reflect on those models and how to apply them to find creative ways that are not relying only on the typical model of I need someone to pay for this. It's either the customer or it's either someone rich that finds some value in doing this. Right? I think as we are now in this time, there are a host of models, not one or two, that can make the arts business sustainable.
Hi, my name is Shambhavi. I'm an arts manager. I manage two organizations. One is called What About Art? It's an artist residency and arts management agency, and I also manage Mumbai Art Room, which is a non-profit gallery. I've been working now for about 3 years, and I'm actually in my process of applying for my master's, Bocconi being one of them. And something that that's kind of always at the back of my head while I'm doing this whole process is, again, the options after you graduate, having an Indian passport, coming back, what can I do over here, all of that stuff. Something that you said which struck me was how we value ourselves as arts managers, and I'm wondering if there's a way you can add a figure to that valuation. How do you monetize that value? And I mean, a goal of mine is to be back in Bombay, living independently as a woman, and I feel like it should be okay to say that. And when you say that to many people, they kind of laugh, you know, because you're like, oh, you work in the arts and all of that stuff. Anyway, I don't know if you face this in your journeys, you know, when you stumbled into your jobs. How did you go about negotiating a salary? What did you say to the people hiring you? Did you put did you monetize your value when you spoke to them? And I mean, I assume, you know, so much of that is linked to the corporate supporters or funders in these various organizations, but in the arts management side of my work, we have our clients, we do different projects, and there are many times I wonder, could I be getting paid more had the negotiation, the budget, been taken that into account? And sometimes I feel like I don't think that's taken into account. So anyway, lots of random thoughts there, but yeah.
I think Preema didn't want to work with me because I wasn't paying her enough. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But I don't recall Niloufer ever being satisfied with any of the money she received from whatever we paid. She never complained too much, but there was always an indication that what she was getting was not enough. Jokes apart, but not does Suruchi think she's getting paid enough. Nobody thinks they get paid enough. Even the man who's earning crores of rupees sitting on top of a company feels that he should get paid more. So it's not about the quantum of money in the first instance. And you actually answered your own question in a way by saying, you implied it, I don't think you said it, but the implication is there's a difference between putting a numerical value to what you feel you should be earning because, like you say, you're a woman in Mumbai, and Mumbai is an expensive city, and you want to be in a safe space, etc., etc. It's perfectly valid. I don't think it's laughing matter. But I don't think you can equate what you're doing, the work that you do, if you're managing an arts organization. I mean, let me give you an example. I did an ad recently. I acted in an advert for Spotify. You know, it was great because I'm in the music space. Spotify is this app. It was perfect. They were not paying me enough, I feel. What were they paying me? It was 4 hours of work and I got paid 75,000 rupees. Now I'm thinking that's not enough. Is that enough?
Dude. There's a serious thing behind this because I think we have to understand that the value of what you do is not measured in monetary terms. What you're measuring in monetary terms is what you think you should be paid for the time you spend, etc., etc. That's what I meant by valuing the work. Yeah. It's because I value what I do, and of course I'm an old guy, I've been doing this for years, I've done hajar ads and films and all, so I should be paid more money. For 4 hours of stupid stand in front, I had to sleep in a Rolls Royce, get up, say bye to my kids, and I got paid 75,000 rupees for that, right? Now, anyone might think that's crap.
You should be getting paid 2 rupees or 3 rupees. Even the guy who washes somebody's car in the morning gets paid less money. And he does more work. So I think it's very important to understand that sometimes in the arts, what you're being paid for is your commitment. But actually you're not even paid for your commitment. Your commitment has to be 100% or 150 or 300%. And what you get for it is not for your commitment. It's for getting for whatever it is that is available or what people think they should pay you. Or what they can afford to pay you. So if you feel, and you have to work with industry, you can't work in isolation, you have to work with whatever the standards are. So my suggestion to you is to really to try and understand what do people get paid for doing the kinds of things that you do. And that's why I feel it's paid less. Because people like me, for doing that nighttime sleeping in some weird farmhouse in Chandigarh in a Rolls Royce, get paid more money than 75,000 rupees. Having said that, I run this project with the UK, the Central School of Speech and Drama, and I work for months, and I don't get paid a dime. And that's a choice that I'm making. And I think that's the one thing I would recommend to everybody who works in the arts, is that the value of being a volunteer, the value of being able to give, because it's an odd balance. You know, in an industry or in a factory, you can manufacture something and sell it. That Rolls Royce will sell for way more than what I would ever get paid, right? But there is some value to what we do. And I don't think, so you have to be careful. So if you're working, say, for the doctors are not great paymasters. They're not. You have to reach a particular level before they really pay you well. Not good paymasters. So don't work for them. But also, how good are you at negotiating? That's one of your questions, right? How good are you at negotiating a salary? So I realized very easily that I can negotiate my wages if I was curating for a wedding better than if I'm doing an arts project. So I do all my negotiating with the guys who do the weddings. Sorry?
I said you should negotiate with those who can pay.
Yes, exactly.
I think that would be the...
Yeah, so becoming a little smart about...
If I can just add to that.
If I can just add to that, and having negotiated in very many projects, I think I totally echo what he says. I teach, and very often it's an honorarium, a little mug that I get, a book. And these are things that I decide to do because I think it's my way of giving back. But I would sum it up by saying you should negotiate with those who you think can pay. And in the arts, it's always, that's a choice that you have to take. But yes, to know how much you have to ask for, share, we're all there. There's a room full of people here who are working, and people are fairly open, at least I am, on projects and how much you're paid or how much you're done for. I mean, so that's something that I think conversations help.
Yeah, I agree with both Divya and Deepthi, but I also have a slightly different perspective, because one of the things that I decided very early on in my career is that the value of my work I know cannot be reflected exactly in my salary remuneration, but it does need to be enough for me to be able to take care of myself and have the life I want. As a single woman, double woman, doesn't matter. So I think when you go out looking for jobs, one of the things that we all need to do, and if the industry is to survive as a professional viable option, one is that I think what they both said is absolutely true. If you have a passion for it, you will be working more than you will get paid. Unless you go into the commercial side of things, where you are selling art, you're working on percentages and things like that, which is a very, very good option. So it really depends on what kind of career you pick. But if you take the not-for-profit route, I think it's very, very good idea to speak to people who've previously worked in that organization, and also speak to your industry peers. A lot of people I know in organizations that I have worked with and known for a while, a sea of people come, work there, and the next sea of people are actually taking a 40%, 50% cut. And that totally affects the salary that can be paid, for example. And the other thing is, know your value. So if I know, for example, for a project, I cannot survive, I cannot, I don't know, buy eggs, I'm sure we all can, but I cannot, live in this, whatever that might be. I think have that marker for you. For example, when I first came to Bombay, the NGMA, I interviewed with them, and I knew that the salaries were at that time maybe 12,000 rupees a month. And the committee actually asked me, they said, you know that's the salary? And I said, yes. And they said, would you be willing to take it on? I said, you tell me, can I either travel to work or can I live in Bombay? So my answer is no. But what that did do is give me an opportunity to connect with people that I wouldn't have the opportunity to before, and I had to wait, and it's extremely frustrating. It's extremely frustrating, but it is a viable career option to everybody. And like both Deepthi and Divya were saying, there are more and more corporates getting into it. It's not just corporates, it's patrons, it's individuals. There are more opportunities coming up. I think my OK Google is responding to my voice. So
like
you
someone
just need to
speaking.
know what are the opportunities. There's lots of opportunities, and speak to your peers, especially people who may be a few years ahead of you, know the organizations, know the people involved, and can give you a sense of what you can expect. I think that is a good way to go about it.
Just want to add one more thing here, because coming from Delhi, because we had the similar conversation, the challenge also is that because there's no sense of parity that exists at what job do you get into the sector and what role should you, the kind of stuff that you have in talent acquisition websites, and it doesn't happen for the sector. So that disorientation also comes from the fact that that kind of a setup just does not exist. The second thing that came up there, and I also, I think there's a case to be made for that as well, is that because there is no parity and therefore you end up negotiating the best you can, or in your sense, figure out who are those who can pay, and who are the ones who can afford to work for less. There is also a space for those entering the sector who can afford to enter the sector. So therefore, the privilege angle comes in, and that also becomes a challenge. So all of these are really useful, but at the back of our heads, when we're thinking of gaps and needs, we also need to think about the fact that there are certain structures and systems that we exist in, and we are part of that privilege, and we've not yet acknowledged what it means for someone coming from a completely different background to access our sector, which is again a little different for the film sector because they have a union that there is some access point which is different in that context. Yeah.
Just a couple of quick... what's notorious in the film sector is that when you're starting out, nobody will pay you a dime, right? Because you're getting an opportunity. And that's not just in that sector. In many sectors there is that. So at least there are some spaces in the corporate world, they might not pay you that much money, at least they're willing to pay you, right? So the number of people who, I understand what you're saying about privilege, but I think you have to be careful. It's not a sweeping thing. I might be educated, but I remember because I came from overseas after studying abroad, and the first theatre group I joined was a Hindi theatre. Everyone looked very skeptically at me because I spent 8 years overseas and they didn't trust the fact that, so there were people in the group who didn't want me around because I had come from a non-Hindi speaking education. But my Hindi was as good or better than anybody else thanks to my father who's a Hindi teacher. So the odd thing sometimes with privilege in this city, so the reason I'm saying because they wanted to pay me less. Because I came from a non-Hindi thing. It happens across the country. You go to a small town, and we faced it in Rajasthan, because you're not from Rajasthan, you're from Bombay, there's a problem, right? People won't accept you. So in India, the notion of privilege is not so straightforward as you're making. There's all kinds of caste issues, there's regional issues, there's north-south, it's all over the place. So I think if there is a question about what one should get paid, it's also dependent on city. Bombay is a way more expensive city. Jodhpur is cheap. I have a friend now who's living in a 3-bedroom apartment and using one room as storage for their production stuff, is paying 7,000 rupees a month, fully furnished. Where can you, so I think the choices that we make in the arts, today there are far many more choices available to us than maybe when I started out in '89, where you were restricted because there wasn't so much arts activity happening in the country. This kind of secular, progressive, modern arts activity. So if you are thinking of studying somewhere and then coming back, my suggestion to you is don't think, unless you're hell-bent on it being Mumbai. But I think the country now has, and sometimes in smaller towns they're willing to pay you much more because they want to attract. Their people are leaving and going to the Delhis and the Bombays. you know. So I think it's worthwhile, speak to peers, speak to other people, people who worked in other parts. And I think the good thing about the arts, which is not the same in the corporate world, is that we are willing to share. And I think that's our strength actually, because we don't have the kind of structures that we're talking about in terms of parity. We have networks. I mean, they sit on this table and you know, there are people I've worked with, I've known. How is it possible? You know, it is because there is that. So I think you have to trust the fraternity, the community. I think the performing arts fraternity, barring the classical fraternity, I think there is a lot more sharing that happens than but yeah, I think, and I think today you can expect to be paid. I mean, to get 50, 60, 70,000 rupees a month, doing something which I got paid 5,000 rupees for, I think is very, very, very possible.
So just to add to that, yes, it is changing. Opportunities are coming up. There are more jobs in the sector than there used to be. And most of us, I think, seem to agree that this scenario is changing. I'm also going to move into barriers a little bit. We can still keep talking, but these prompt questions are going to keep coming up.
I'm just going to go into you saying that there's more opportunities out there, and I'm going to, about the sharing bit that you said. So through the Culture Lab, we actually have started something, because the Culture Lab is a small team. It's headed by Parmesh, but we're a small team, and I think my colleagues or whoever have been there, I think everyone kind of just stumbled upon someone new, Parmesh, and then there was an idea and it kind of went on, and then someone reached out to us. And what we realized is that people should at least realize, and kids in college probably don't realize, everyone knows about the MBA jobs and the doctors and this, that and the other, but you don't probably realize what a job for you in the cultural space could be if you're not quote unquote a performer or completely passionate about, you know, like if you're into theatre, then you probably become a performer, but you won't perceive yourself as someone who's managing the performer. I don't think that kind of scenario exists a lot, and through that, what the Culture Lab did is something we started last year that I'd like to just kind of, you know, segue into right now and talk about. So in being in a corporate and in Godrej, there's a lot of these training programs that happen through MBA schools for the MBA students, because internship is just something that happens by default through their training program. That's not something that happens with the humanities. Like, no one came to the colleges, no one came to Xavier's when I was there and said that, oh, there's an internship opportunity for, you know, something around the arts or something around the social sector or an NGO, whatever. What we started is that we said that we're going to do this training program where we went only specifically to humanities colleges. We went to design schools, we went to architecture schools, and we're like, at the lab, we're a space that holds conversations, and one of the primary ways that we do it is through a public event that we do. So we're like, we're going to go to these colleges, we're going to talk to these kids, and we're like, if there's one event that you want to do, which talks about anything, we'll be more than happy to do it, but you need to tell us what it is and you need to tell us how you're going to do it. And that was their pitch for applying to this program that we call the leadership program at the lab. We started year one last year. We got 7 kids, so they kind of bring in their ideas about what this event might be. And then through a process of elimination, it kind of gets simmered down into one event where 7 kids who came to the forum saying they had 7 ideas, they all kind of work towards this one idea that takes the forum. And they spend a month with us at the lab in the summer. What happens through that is that the lab, through its existence over time, through the ACRI, through various people in the room, has built a network for itself. When you build that network, the students then get exposed to your network through being with us for that 1 month. And then suddenly they realize that maybe they didn't step upon this because it's not out there on LinkedIn more often than not when there's an opening in the art space. It doesn't pop up that often either. But they then got exposed to various things that were happening. They got exposed to smaller projects that were happening. And just through that networking or through that exposure, there's now more inflection taking place that maybe this is something I could venture into. Whether they do, whether they don't, that's secondary. But at least now you know that there are some other things out there. And through their time at the lab, they stay with us. They kind of learn the way we do stuff at the lab, with this, whether it's putting this event together, how do you communicate. We do use social media, so how do you use it on social media, etc., etc. And And yeah, they have this graduating event that they kind of pull together. And we've been very gracious because in year one we had a lot of the friends of the lab who came and were faculty to these people and spoke to them. And they were like, had we had this opportunity back then when I was just, going into my photography career, or when I was figuring out that, yes, I want to do something in the arts, but yes, I want to be paid, but then how do I navigate all this? It would have probably left me with just making more informed choices. And that's something, and I think that's a barrier that we realized was probably there. And at the same time, I don't think it's navigated, but it's in a direction that way.
And as we keep discussing, I'm just going to share one more slide, which is, it's on some of the initial research insights that we've got on the gaps. We've touched upon some of them, but just to sort of run through them, and we can just continue the discussion into the next stage. But financial remuneration is what we touched upon right now. Mentorship and networking was another big area that came through repeatedly, not just in our insights, but also what you shared with us is what's lacking. And we hope spaces like this create that kind of or sort of break down those barriers that you see between a hierarchy that may or may not exist, and how do you reach people. Allegiance, knowing the right people gets you a senior designation much faster, apparently. Deep hierarchies, gap between employees and who run organizations, that there seems to be this sort of ceiling, glass or otherwise. Social circles do matter, and what happens when you're an introvert. There was some very interesting questions that did come in. Lack of formal training and feedback in a work scenario, in terms of how do you look at things like key result areas, some of the things that perhaps we need to take away from the business, but also what business can take away is how do you keep an employee motivated constantly for years and decades. But essentially, how do you, in the absence of formal training, or even when there is formal training, how do you engage with your peers, with your colleagues, and particularly your bosses, and get the feedback that allows you to get to the next stage, that helps you define and chart that path for you to the next stage. And of course, sector knowledge, which actually is one of the things that came up most often. How do you realize what's happening across the cultural sector, not just in performing arts? And if you're in dance, how do you know about theatre? If you're in theatre, how do you know about street art? Where are those conversations happening, and getting a sense of... Thank you, yay. But these are some of the, that's also just about 5 years ago, and that's not a formal space where you get that information, right? So how is it that we can create these sort of, and especially the information that is not shared as an opportunity? How do you get access to that? Yeah.
Her question earlier about this thing also, and a lot of this expects or comes from a space that expects some amount of planning in the organization, right? That's why we are assuming that, the thing about what's the feedback process, which can then allow somebody working in an institution or something to know, this is what I have to do, and then I can move up. Interestingly, when we started working, there was no thought of moving up anywhere. If anything, you moved sideways. You never moved up, right? That's one. Second is, most organizations were artist-led. So you had people who were artists who coming from sectors that they had deep knowledge about, and then you have a rank amateur who comes up in front and expects to be paid a bomb, and then you have people thinking, who the hell are you? I've struggled for years to be where I am. So I think the gaps are many.
Yeah.
The gaps are not few, but the presupposition somehow is, and which I think is a sense of the entitlement. I think this is coming from education spaces, expecting a certain degree of planning to have already happened in the arts organization before somebody enters and joins. So when they join, there is already a path, a ready reckoner of sorts available to them, which tells them that if in 5 years' time you want to earn so much money, these are the steps. The funny thing though is, and this is for all not-for-profits, and I go crazy trying to explain people what this is. For any not-for-profit, there is no formula of how you can generate surplus. And if there is no formula, some complex formula to generate surplus, how are you going to be able to promise your employees a wage increase over a period of time? It's a completely different way of working in this sector. For other businesses which are profit-oriented, Yes, they have profits, and because profits are being generated, then you can share those profits in some way or the other. So the expectation somehow to be in a not-for-profit space, to be paid a bomb, and then expect some kind of a growth. So the gap is also in perception of what these spaces are, what these careers are, because you're using a standard model for something else, which has a very linear growth path. So the value that is there in moving sideways is not understood by most people who apply for these jobs, because they have no experience of that industry in any case. So while I take on board exactly what you're saying with the efforts being done, I think the value is in offering plenty of opportunities for internships to allow the young people to at least begin to understand how the spaces work. The art space anywhere in the world, however organized it is, very rare that you have a very clear upward movement.
Having said that, so there are a couple of very interesting battles that you brought forth. Please join in, but they're very interesting battles, and I'm going to put that down for all of us to discuss because they are really important. Here we're talking about what used to exist and how things have changed. One of them, and this is something because we've been reading a lot in our desk research, is working modes of the millennials, right? And this whole dialogue around entitlement comes up a lot. And here's a real challenge because there is a snigger when we talk about the millennial work context and entitlement, but the fact is this is the future of work. So how do we negotiate the growth path in a sector that we want to, on one side, see as, I'll just bring in the tensions and then we can discuss, is a little bit about the fact that there are, on one side, there's a way that we used to work in the arts and how that scenario is changing, because the whole notion of even for-profit and not-for-profit is changing. Now we're talking about social impact, now we're talking about image building. We're also talking about change in some kind of policy, whether it's CSR. We're talking about people coming in and supporting the sector, whether as corporates or as better jobs. So where is the rationale, therefore, also to step away from the existing notions of not-for-profit and for-profit and moving into, can we continue to bring in the value that we bring in as the art sector and also survive on the money that we are making? I'm just going to add one more thing to this as we move on this part as well, is because what that is leading to is a certain kind of tension that I have seen in my work. We also run a consultancy where we work with arts organizations on the whole notion of value. We talk about how do you build value for the cultural sector. The two ways in which we do that is audience development and arts research. Part of what we're doing with SDA Bocconi, it falls into arts research. What we realized in 3 years of working is that audience development, dur ki baat hai. What's important is your basic systems and structures. Part of the work that we end up doing right now is hiring, talent acquisition, and it's so important to understand the insecurities and the complexities that people in the sector are dealing with, because tomorrow they're going to lead my organization, they're going to lead my team, they're going to lead projects that maybe I have started but they're going to be taking it to fruition. This is the context that we also need to think about when we talk about sustainability of the sector.
I think which I was trying to say is that what we don't have in the arts is that planning that makes all these things possible. Because most of the people who've begun their organizations don't really plan for something. They themselves don't know. I'm not talking about the person who's being hired. That person in any case is nervous and insecure and uncertain. I'm saying organizations themselves don't know where their money, particularly if you're an arts organization that has no dedicated fund. You're constantly applying for funding. You're trying to figure out where's project funding going to come from. Who's going to be my benefactor? So what I'm trying to say is that if the new entrants in these industries had a better understanding, we find a way in which, then that's through internships, through case studies, where they become a little more comfortable with the uncertainty of this entire space.
But then also, just to sort of add, the uncertainty also comes from the fact that a lot of arts leaders are not starting conversations with a certain, that's where arts management comes in with vision, mission. Divya, you would know. That's a real space. A lot of the work that is starting on passion, and some of them onto training.
So what's missing is the planning. Of course, there's a financial planning, there's a human resource planning, there's vision, mission.
Which can be taught,
Which can be taught. So that's the space for...
Not only taught,
for the entrant, that's more for the organization.
Not only taught, but I also feel mandated. What really tends to happen in the creative industries versus other industries is in the creative industries you're trying to build stakeholder value vis-a-vis shareholder value, and really what tends to happen, and if you look at the Indian context, it's such a case that, I mean, if you look at the film industry, which we all consider to be an industry among the arts, is not an industry in India. It's not a recognized industry, so none of the labor laws apply to anyone in the film industry. And how that affects us on an individual level is it has a trickle-down effect on the creative industries as a whole. So, for example, the people who do benefit from it, for example, when you say 12,000, that's salary for a government organization, because they fall under class 4, class 3 and those jobs, their PF gets accounted into that and things like that. So you do have that standard of minimum wage that comes from that. So, for example, if you look at an industry perspective, you compare what a government is willing to pay for this service, and then maybe go 2 or 3 times that and take it to private sector. But here you're not able to do that. You won't even factor that level of insurance or that minimum wage. What goes into the minimum wage? Is it just rent? Is it my value? Or is it these uncertainties that you speak about? And that's what the two things in a space, what you're dealing with, you're operating in an industry which is based on intangibles. The value of the work itself is always in debate. Today you may put a 5 rupee value on it, tomorrow it's a 5 crore value on the same piece of work. And unfortunately, that's how it's also trickled down to the people in the sector, and really that's how it's become subjective value to the people in the sector as well. Whereas, and that's a lot to do with when we're speaking about commodities earlier, and you can't commodify Indian classical music. I mean, that kind of mindset is also leading us to. Like, for example, we have 1 billion songs that are in Indian, or that exist in Indian repertoire, out of which only 60 million have been digitized. So with that approach, what is happening is we are losing out on that 99% of our culture, which is just really going down which if we don't take that approach of the business. I understand what everyone spoke. Yes, business has a lot to learn from the arts also, but this is one thing I would say. This is the gap that you can kind of fill in with the business learnings. Is this just being able to put that valuation and put that value to it, because businesses are not doing well with it right now. I mean, Spotify doesn't put a value to a song anymore. It's selling you a service. So the music industry has gone from selling you a song as a product to selling you streaming services. So the future.
The interesting thing about that is that in between there was this moment where songs became data, and now they moved into service. So it's actually finding its own growth pattern. So from listening to a song, you paid for the quantum of data that moved, and now the service is no longer about the quantum of data. So the shifts in technology, which is really another thing I think where arts management come in. I mean, there are software to help organizations manage and plan their businesses. Nobody's using those softwares. There's a lot to be learned from, what you're referring to as the creative industries. The funny thing is that the film industry has been classified as an industry in India, but only in so that banks can provide loans to them. There's no other standard of industry. The funny problem that people like me face, because when we started out working over here, the space was completely non-structured. And now, 30 years later, there's all kinds of structures that are being adopted by various institutions. That the idea of parity in any way becomes a, theoretical space. Because, there's this term we used to have in development studies called uneven and combined development, where people are growing in all different directions. We have no national paradigm. Because we don't really fund the arts in the country, it's completely private to a large extent, and we don't have that philanthropic idea that exists in the US as a culture. Private institutional funding for the arts is a long ways away. Even the IFA, how much money can they put out for a project? 1 lakh, 2 lakh, 5 lakhs? What projects are you going to be able to sustain from that? So, parity I don't think is a goal. I don't think we can use that as what we should be aiming for. I think that's equally far away, like audience development. I think there is much more money available to the arts today than it was maybe I would say 15, 20 years ago. I think it calls for efficient managers to be there who understand the larger, and that's another thing to be understood by the students who do arts management, is really what are the visions in place for the arts in the country? What are the visions of the practitioners who are trying to do what they're doing? Why is Jodhpur happening in the first place? How did NH7 change? Case studies was one of the things. But really we are all operating in these sort of spiky, all over the place, you know, pierced here, pierced here. Do you know what I'm trying to say? That we shouldn't be aspiring for a homogeneity of understanding or aspiring to a homogeneous parity. I think it's about being able to understand the challenges that exist, which are all over the place. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. I think I'm talking too much. I should retire.
Hi. So I also see 3 people who've come and want to share. Just going to introduce one other element. This is some of what the initial insights are telling us on, since we're talking about what arts management can do, but also what exists, right? So in India, of course, you've got diplomas and certificate programs. We don't really have degrees. So what you end up accessing is some amount of short-term training possibilities. Whatever is available in undergrad or postgrad options are available abroad. What a degree does is that it adds weightage, but they could potentially take someone a little more seriously with a degree or with an international qualification, and it helps in terms of adding skill sets and provides clarity, but not sure how it helps with the career growth. This is some of the insights that came. Just want to lay it here, and please go ahead. But I must let you know another 5-7 minutes. And
yeah, I'm also late for a dinner, but the millennial in me was triggered, so I'm still here. I studied at Goldsmiths and I did fine art and art history. And Goldsmiths is one of the best universities in the world for art, blah, 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 blah. But I was completely ill-equipped for working in the art space after I graduated. Internships, again, I'm very privileged, so I was able to do internships. I didn't have to be paid to do a lot of my internships. So I learned stuff. But again, I really did not learn very much about the art world, about the cultural sector, about the different institutions that I worked in and how they functioned in the cultural sector. All of this I've learned on the job now, but I've learned on the job by just doing and observing people around me. I would have loved to have had 1 month or even the first week in my job, my boss sort of sit me down and say, Shambhavi, this is what we do, this is why it matters, this is why I can't pay you this much, but this is what, these are our values and I'm hiring you because I see that in you, blah, 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 blah. That would have been great. I think it's, and like Rashmi said, we as the millennials are trying to forge these paths for ourselves in this space where you don't have a model, you don't have anything to really look at. All of you guys have created these spaces in India. So we're here kind of looking up to you guys. And I guess that's my input. It would be great to sit your employees down and just say, this is what we do, this is why we do it, and this is how you can help. And then I will start to understand why I'm paid this much. I get it. I completely get all of that now, 2 years into the job. But had I known a lot of these things starting off, I think maybe I'd have a very different view, or I would go about my job differently. I don't know, but that's my input.
What did they tell you in the beginning if they didn't tell you all this?
Join the table. Sorry. It builds on what Shambhavi said, actually. So, I spent my early years as an artist, came back to India, discovered there's no space for arts, especially the area of arts that I was interested in, which is performance and large-scale sort of, like structural art, things that people do abroad that we can't replicate here, Robert Smithson land art, for example. So when I came back, they were like, oh, arts, do you do Photoshop? Like, that was the first question. I entered the film industry because at that time, that was what paid me. They just wanted young people to put in the hours. They didn't care about training. They didn't care about anything. In fact, when I joined, reality television was just sort of beginning its upswing there. And my boss at MTV was very clear. He said, look, you're a girl, you're entering film production, all right, which is traditionally like a male job. Don't look at me for help. Figure everything out on your own. You're not going to get any help from me, because if I do seem like I am helping you, people will go over your head and come to me instead, because they know they can override you. So don't look at me, figure everything out on your own. And that was like my training, basically. And that's how I started. And then I went on to work at Endemol. I've worked with Fremantle for a number of years. And then obviously I went on to commercial films, and then I quit that too, because it was just, everything was just sort of ballooning too much. But what I meant to say was that these areas are not professionally, obviously, like trained. You have your FTIIs, you have your NSTs, but they only train you in terms of technical space. Nobody trains you in production. Nobody trains you in, especially gendered areas like this, where, you have film crews that are mostly male, and then you're a female sort of practitioner in that space, and then how do you negotiate that, and how do you sort of approach that? And these days, there are companies which come in from abroad with international IPs. And then how do you implement that IP in India, where, film and television is a whole different beast. In India, there are unions with the MNS, and then there are unions with the Shiv Sena, and then you've got to work with that. So a lot of these things are, as Shambhavi very rightly said, like the first day on the job, nobody tells you this. You've got to sort of, like, they expect you to put in the hours and figure it out. And if you're not smart enough to do that, you get left by the wayside, basically. So now I'm working in sort of the areas of culture and literature. I'm very interested in that because I want to bring the experience of having worked in film and television, especially in variety programs, to the space of like literature, culture, etc. The problem is that, again, it's very disorganized because you have like, people who don't respond to emails, who have no idea about how to set out a sort of budgeting plan or anything like that. So again, that's not taught. You have to sort of sit and figure it out. So I think it would really help in terms of an arts management program to sort of set out that, yes, this is what we're teaching you, but this is not what you'll find out there in the field on the ground,
So essentially like a lot more conversation also between, to a certain extent, academia and industry.
Yes, but also to, as Shambhavi said, like to give millennials like an idea that yes, no one's going to tell you this, you are learning this, but out there people are still sort of operating on a very different level, and they will not sort of, they'll not give you all this information. You will have to learn it on your own. So.
Okay, and there are a couple of comments here, and I believe you wanted to add something.
I'm going to do a really quick introduction and then hopefully lead up to a question. I'm Vaishali from Hyderabad. I'm one of the co-founders of a children's theatre festival. I'm a theatre practitioner, and the Children's Theatre Festival has completed its 9th year last year, so we are in our 10th year. And there's a lot that's been said here today that I really agree with. Yes, we value our work. It's hard for us to get other people to value it. Yes, we started this as a group of friends who felt that the children in Hyderabad needed to be watching quality theatre and needed access to that. We didn't plan to make it this far. Funding is very uncertain constantly, so we can't plan. I actually came today to kind of listen and think about, I'm an unwilling arts manager for the last 9 years. I don't want to keep doing this. And I came to kind of hear about what it is that we can, like, would it add value to us to get an arts manager on board? Where do we find one? somebody like these, the young lady asking about what we can pay them, depends on what you can generate. You know, what do you see this organized, and also to ask questions to some of the people here who, like Terrell and Niloufer, in terms of sustainability for your production houses, what are your plans beyond you?
Yeah.
Just putting it out there, you know, because I think like, you know, what you said is a lot of us are in this because we are passionate about it and we feel strongly about it and we love doing it. But one also wants it to be sustainable so that this can, you know.
You sustained it for 9 years, right?
And I'm a little tired.
So definitely hire some, definitely I'm sure there are quite a few arts managers here who can offer their services. And
I'm not sure I can afford them, the expectations are phenomenal.
but I think I just wanted to tag onto the word that you've used, which is sustainable. I think that's really critical, and I don't think it's whether it's arts or business. I think just generally the idea that you're building something to last, which carries weight beyond a time, because it takes so much effort and so much energy and so much thinking to be able to put that first step down and then to move from that first step to another step and to another step.
For planning is because we're very busy sustaining ourselves.
Correct.
We are not for profit, so we can't pay ourselves.
Yeah. So it's a good point you make, because one of the things I've faced with students that we meet in ATSA, which is this art thing, South Asia thing, and I'm one of the financial planning. There's another student, Sujay, here somewhere. Where is Sujay? There he is, from there. There's a tendency on the part of reluctant arts managers, reluctant producers, because in any case you're reluctant and resistant. So the idea of then getting into planning is like, oh God, somebody kill this word planning. So there's a tendency to look upon it as a chicken and egg situation, that you can't really get to the egg part of it, which is the planning, because you're still looking after the chicken. The chicken got to lay some eggs before you can actually get down to planning it. But I think there is a bit of a mythical idea of what planning is. Planning is to the extent that, hey, if you want to buy a birthday gift for somebody, you will only buy the gift when you know you have the money, right? Unless you have a credit card which has a big bank balance. Or you make it, exactly. What you're saying is you're tired of making it. You know what I mean? Metaphorically, you're tired of having to make it, right? So, I don't think it's a chicken and egg situation. I think it's about, Niloufer said it very well, that when she went to study, it was like literally taking a step back. It's about breathing. It's about allowing things to coalesce. You have 9 years of phenomenal experience. You would be able to plan a children's festival really well.
I mean, one of the reasons I'm here is because I'm looking for, I mean, this is our 10th year. I feel a responsibility or accountability of how one takes it forward.
So,
and it's the arts managers who are responding to the specifics of this country.
yeah, I'd like to also, sorry, because in the interest of time as well, and I know that there are people leaving without eating, is what I was told. So I just want to also take your question and then see if everybody can just, I mean, whoever would like to respond just once and continue this conversation but with food. Yeah? Okay.
So, hello, my name is Preema and I'm a cost engineer, so totally different to the field. So my question is, as a manager or as a art manager or businessman, how do you motivate the non-core specific artist staff to work on your project or in your company? So for example, let's say you have to work on your staffing, the people whom you hire. If you are hiring the people who are non-core specific, how do you motivate them to work in your company compared to the value or monetary benefits which they will get in another field or another sector? So
I'm trying to just sort of understand your question a little better. So essentially you're saying, how do you motivate someone who's not from your core area to work
in your company?
In your company.
Yes. So for example, a CA or for example, cost engineer. You need a person to monitor your costs, to make your cost statements. So how do you motivate them to work in an art-specific field and not in a bank?
It's the pleasure of positive impact, the value of your work, the pleasure of seeing it spread. That's great, it's gratifying.
Add to that. I think all of the non-core specific, if that's the terminology, people who work with us, the chartered accountants and the sort of support periphery ecosystem, while we are not paid, we still have to pay what the industry pays to them. So this is what I think is also something that is out there. We don't pay our non-core specific people any less, but I think they receive manifold, so I echo what she said, because the satisfaction of working very many times in arts-related projects is something that is, once you've experienced it, I think a lot of them just are proud to say that we are working with so-and-so who, they may not always understand. So, for example, when we first listed our company, we had to put it down as interior designers, because you could not understand. We were not an NGO, we were a private listed company. They didn't understand, what do you do, kya karte ho? Exhibitions, like, we didn't know any better either. So we said we do exhibitions, we work with museums, so acha parde lagate ho, which is you put up curtains. And so therefore we were listed as interior decorators. So we are a 10-year-old interior decoration company technically. Yeah, but I think come work with us. I think you'll enjoy it.
Okay, with that, I'm so sorry. We don't want to close this. Clearly, there's still a large majority that wants to stay on. So let's just move this conversation forward with food. Just a couple of things before we close, because we don't want to leave it unfinished. There's a lot that you've given. I'd love to summarize it. I don't think I can. But I promise you that a lot of this is going to go into the white paper. And we, as you can see, our wonderful team here has been tirelessly recording for the last 2.5 hours. This video will go online. Like I've mentioned earlier, if there's something that you don't want us to keep online, do let us know.
I didn't realize you were going to broadcast it.
No. We're going to document it and then put it online, broadcast it.
Bleep the names out.
That, no.
Just bleep the names out.
You must send the copies to us beforehand so we can scrutinize.
Oh no, that's called the censorship certificate. That's how he got into the arts. But
being an actor, also check which angle works better.
I'll send you his number. So we're just on next steps. We have a focus group discussion next week, where we are looking to actually even get people who don't know how to even get into this sector. So perhaps someone who's in Usha Gandhi College of Law and is working in a theatre group, would love to have them in that conversation to understand what motivates, because we want to get that conversation across the board. Of course, we'll be doing about 6 to 8 more interviews and the white paper in April. Aside from that, thank you, and there's food. No, but seriously, I must say that it's not every day that you find such an illustrious group here. I can't explain the wealth of experience we have here. If this was to be monetized, their time, were it to be monetized right now, would have been really valuable. I do want to sincerely thank all of you for your time. And your inputs here, and thank you in advance for the inputs. You'll continue sharing with several questionnaires back at the table here.
Can you reiterate that we are very open for people to contact us otherwise and chat with us? I mean, we want
Yes.
the community to grow.
Yes, please. There you go. There is that. But I also do want to mention that the group, the Facebook group, we've now starting city chapters of the group, where we want the communities in the city to start owning some of these conversations. We have a Bombay chapter. We did our first event a month ago at Gurta, and our second event is going to be a session on networking and mentorship. So any of you, if you can sign up to be a mentor, we would find you mentees who you can talk to for half an hour, 45 minutes at our event next time in May. So, and any of you as well, please join us for that. A big thank you to SDA Bocconi for helping us put this event, actually hosting this event. The team at A, the team there, Mayur and Mandar, I think they've left, one of them has left. Our production team, thanks guys. And my own team, Wayne and Sonam, put your hands up. I've done nothing, they've done everything. So thanks so much for your help. And a big thank you to all of you for staying back without food or water. I'm hoping that you've managed to get some of that. Please continue to hang on and join us and introduce yourselves. The colors don't matter anymore. Thanks.
And thank you, Rashmi.